Welcome back to County Board Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Ben Hampton, and today I'm chatting with County Board Chair Christian Dorsey and Board Member Libby Garvey about some of the actions the board took at its September meeting. So the next topic that we have on our docket hopefully will not take as long as it did over the weekend, which is the redevelopment of the Holiday Inn property in Rosslyn. So it was a pretty long discussion, I understand. I didn't watch the whole thing.
Come on, it was thrilling television, Ben. Thrilling.
What can people expect to see now that this project has been essentially given the green light?
Yes. So we did approve a project to a redevelopment plan for where currently the Holiday Inn is in Rosslyn, which is a hotel that many Arlingtonians probably know for its conference center facilities. But it's one that is, I believe, 60 years old, somewhere about 60 years old.
Yeah, I think it was 50, 60.
Yeah, so 50, 60-year-old building. It's past its useful life, due for redevelopment, and the owner put a plan out to build a hotel and expanded conference facility, and on the same parcel do a tower with residence. So we have a significant amount of density, but it's consistent generally with the plans, the land use plans that we have for Rosslyn. But of course, with anything of this magnitude, it's going to affect people. And so we heard from a lot of people who were concerned about a number of issues, and many of which we discussed because we shared concerns as well. Traffic was a big thing. People are wondering about not only with the new development with all of the new residents, but the conference center piece of it that we talked about is going to have capacity for over 500 cars. And one of the streets that this new development will abut is a very narrow neighborhood serving street, North Nash.
Which a lot of people probably know. Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot to work through there. There were some aesthetics and design issues and functionality issues which were surfaced, and we're good local government. We explore each of those issues as deeply as we need to explore them.
One of the questions was, does it comply with the sector plan? So the Rosslyn sector plan, this is basically the first project with the new sector plan, and there was a lot of disagreement on that. Our staff felt pretty clearly that it did, and it gets to the point of how much the sector plan was a guideline. Some people seem to think things that might be a guideline, but it's supposed to be like that. And so you had a lot of kind of just a different viewpoint, I think, on how you apply the sector plan. One thing I'll point out, which you can see in this picture, which it's actually more attractive than some other ones, but one of the things we're trying to get on the Rosslyn skyline is a difference in height. So it isn't just this monolithic wall. And I think this particular project did a really successful job with that.
For folks who aren't familiar with the sector plan, what else does it call for in terms of?
Well, there were 35 items, so I'm not going to get them all.
Well, we're not going to go through all that.
Sure.
But I think people are pretty familiar with the Rosslyn skyline and what can be found there and what things have changed in recent years. But there's more on the way, and there's an attempt to sort of change some of what's there.
So a main issue, which I think is hard, I don't know about you, Kristen, but it seems to me the diciest ones for people is that we have this observation deck, and we don't want new development to block the view on the observation deck. So there's a lot of thinking when things are how is that going to affect the view from the observation deck? So while we want buildings to have the variation in height, we also want them to not be too high to block the view, but that's where the good views are, and that's where the real financial incentive is. It's a real balance, I think. I feel like that's one of the hardest things. We will get some big improvements on Gateway Park, which was going to be needed. And I don't know, Christian, you did Planning Commission. You're probably clear about this.
The sector plan, took into account that very real thing that we have a very urbanized area in Rosslyn with a skyline with very tall buildings and monumental, iconic views. And the approach, which can be summarized as the peaks and valleys approach, looks at strategically where you have those really high peaks, but then having those valleys so that you can maintain view sheds, not have heat island effects, not have incredible issues with wind tunnels, and then also respect a modest tapering to neighborhoods. So there was a really thoughtful approach about how all the Lego pieces needed to fit in order to work. And generally, this development follows that, what was envisioned for this parcel. The real question became, how do you take particularly the traffic that is envisioned for this site, how does that fit when a residential street, North Nash, is the primary one that's going to service.
And already doesn't work very well.
Already
That's the
doesn't work
already
well.
Doesn't
It's
work
going to
very well.
serve you know, a number of 300 plus new residents. It's also going to serve the loading dock capacity for the building. So there are a lot of things to work out there.
And tour bus unloading, but that was a
Sure.
problem because the big bus comes and stops in the street to unload people, and that, you know, blocks traffic as well. That was one of the concerns. Parking.
Yep. And then we didn't even talk about the other key thing. You know, the sector plan identifies benefits that should come when redevelopment occurs. And one of the principal benefits was a passageway through this property. And there was some dissent about where that passageway needed to be. But what we focused on at the board meeting was how this passageway should be treated architecturally and from a design standpoint so that it's actually functional. You know, Rosslyn right now is built
Well, not
with a
only
lot
functional,
of
but attractive.
attractive,
That's
absolutely.
part of it, yeah.
But you know, Rosslyn right now is built with a lot of sky bridges and ways to connect over the big roads. And you know, the problem is no one knows that it's there, and then when you get there, it's not very inviting. We didn't want to replicate that here, so we spent a lot of time figuring out how we can direct the applicant to design such a walkway, a pedestrian walkway that A, had utility, was attractive, wouldn't become a nuisance to maintain, and could really add value.
Yeah, and the applicant actually, I think, gave a lot more detail when they got to the meeting, which I hadn't realized, the passageway in the middle, it actually is going to be a way into a restaurant on one side and a lobby on that, so it's actually a way to enter, a different way to enter the buildings, which I think would be, you know, appealing to people to do. I mean, it's meant to add convenience. That's part of the reason it's there. And I think they did a lot more showing that sort of how it was going to look, which made everyone, most people, not everyone, but most people certainly feel better about it. And then there was the parking, and we actually kind of had a virtual handshake, I think, what you did at the table as our chair. I think you did. Because there are not a lot of parking spaces on Nash Street, but there are a number, which people who live right there, if you've got somebody coming to visit, if you've got somebody that, like the plumber needs to come, where are they going to put their car? And if it has to be in a hotel center where they're going to be spending $20 or more, and I mean, that's just doesn't work out very well. And the folks in the neighborhood were saying, first you've got us blocked in, so it's going to be even harder to get out of where we are, which is probably to some extent true, at least until they get Memorial Bridge finished and a few other things done. But also, and then you take away our parking. So that we actually, as I say, the chair did kind of a virtual handshake at the table where they're gonna come up with, I think, some ways that can provide some reasonably priced parking for the immediate neighborhood, and I think they're going to figure that out. I think that will help a little bit. It was interesting too to me, Christian, the one thing when they asked about the demolition, because there's I guess there are two ways to demolish a building. I learn things all the time. One of them is the, I guess, explosion thing, and the whole thing falls down and there's huge dust and it's a big mess. And the other is brick by brick, which must be a little, probably not really brick by brick, but that takes longer, but it's much less disruptive. Chunk by chunk, that sounds better, yeah. And that's what they're going to be doing. And it's interesting, Ditmar built the hotel that's there. They're going to take it down, they're going to build this, and they're going to continue to operate it. So they're longtime members of our community, and I think that helps.
So it's been a landmark for a long time. When does it start changing?
Next year, most likely.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly
soon.
if they've set the date certain. I'm sure that's probably going to depend a lot on contracts that the hotel has.
Yeah.
Because believe it or not, even though it's a very old hotel and they're ready to redevelop it, it's got a high occupancy and it's still used because it's a value.
Great location,
Yes,
and it's not too expensive because it's not too fancy. It's older.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
All right.